The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and leather chairs that had absorbed decades of difficult conversations. The furniture was expensive and uncomfortable. I sat across from Nora, our family attorney, watching her read the will out loud with her reading glasses perched carefully on her nose. My father had passed 3 weeks ago, and everything felt heavy in a way I couldn't quite name. My name is Rachel, and I'm 52 years old. I've spent the last decade handling hospital visits, paying medical bills, and making hard decisions that nobody else wanted to make. I drove to appointments, I sat through consultations, I argued with insurance companies, I made impossible decisions about my father's care. Now I was about to find out what he'd left me. I felt nervous in a way I couldn't explain. Nora adjusted her glasses carefully and read the words that would change everything about my life. Rachel's share is held in trust, with Justin as trustee. Justin, my younger brother. 3 years younger, and somehow always the favorite child. He was sitting in the corner of the room, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. His smile was wide and confident and unearned. Nora continued reading, and everyone nodded like this was the most normal thing in the world. Like it made perfect sense. My father trusted Justin to manage my inheritance. Just like that, it was done. I felt something twist in my stomach, a sensation I couldn't quite name. Justin never managed anything in his life. He couldn't balance his own checkbook. He'd had 3 jobs in 5 years. He'd never finished a project, never seen anything through to completion. But everyone in that room seemed to think this was perfect. My mother, our other siblings, the lawyer, they all seemed to think it was a wonderful arrangement. Like my brother's complete lack of financial responsibility didn't matter. Like the fact that he'd never been there during the hard years didn't matter at all. During the nights I sat in the hospital. During the mornings I drove to the pharmacy for medications. During the afternoons I spent on hold with insurance companies arguing about coverage. Justin leaned back in his chair, still grinning that infuriating grin. "I'll be fair," he said, looking directly at me with an expression of false sincerity that made my skin crawl. Everyone laughed. Their laughter filled the room. I didn't laugh. I watched his face carefully, trying to see if there was any kindness there, any real promise behind those words. There wasn't. Just that smile that never reached his eyes. The one he'd perfected over 45 years of being the charming one, the easy one, the son who never had to do difficult things. Then Nora said something that made the room go quiet completely. "Your husband already signed the acknowledgement," she told Justin. She wasn't smiling. Her voice was careful, professional, but there was something underneath it. Something like a warning. Something that said she knew more than she was saying. I looked at Justin's face and watched his smile slip for just a second. That was when I knew something was wrong. That was the moment I understood that whatever my father had set up, whatever he'd intended, it wasn't going to work the way he'd planned. My brother's grin came back quickly, but it was different. It was the smile of someone who knew he'd been caught doing something, but didn't care because he was going to do it anyway. It was a smile that said he had a plan. I went home that day feeling completely unsettled and anxious. I called Nora back immediately. I needed to understand what she meant. I asked her what the acknowledgement meant and why her tone had changed so suddenly. She explained, in careful legal language, that Justin had been required to promise he would follow the trust's rules, that he would act in my best interest, that he would account for every single dollar. My name is Rachel, and I am the daughter who took care of everything while nobody else was willing to step up or help. For 12 years, while my brother Justin traveled and did whatever he wanted without responsibility or concern, I was the one driving to the hospital. I was the one sitting in waiting rooms at 3 a.m, drinking terrible coffee and staring at the ceiling. I was the one handling insurance forms that didn't make sense, arguing with pharmacy companies about prescriptions, making impossible decisions about my father's care when doctors asked me what I wanted to do next. I left my job eventually. There was no choice. There was too much to handle, and nobody else was stepping up to take responsibility. Certainly not Justin. He called occasionally, maybe once a month. He sent flowers once when Dad was particularly ill, but when Dad needed someone to manage the details of his life, When Dad needed someone to be there every single day, I was the only one who showed up, the only one who sacrificed. So when the will was read and I learned that Justin would control my inheritance, I felt more than just shock. I felt completely erased. I felt like my 12 years of sacrifice had been invisible to my father. Like he'd watched his youngest son do nothing, be nowhere, and decided he was the right person to protect his daughter's future. It made absolutely no sense to me. That afternoon, I confronted Justin directly. We were sitting in my kitchen, just the two of us, at the table where we'd eaten dinner as kids. I asked him when he'd signed the acknowledgement papers. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked away. He mumbled something about it being routine, like it wasn't important at all. That was when I knew he was lying. His body language said everything his words didn't say. His discomfort was obvious. "When did you sign?" I demanded. He muttered, "Marla said it was routine." Marla is Justin's wife. I felt my chest tighten immediately. She'd been in the hospital. She'd been there during the final weeks when my father was declining. I didn't remember seeing her with paperwork, but I also wasn't watching for that. I was too busy watching my father slip away. I was focused on his comfort and his pain, not on what Marla was doing. Justin stood up to leave. He didn't want to continue this conversation. I grabbed his arm. "What did Marla say?" I demanded. He pulled away from me, looking angry, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "She just said I should sign it, that it was what Dad wanted," he said. I knew he was lying. I could see it written across his face. Marla always pushed Justin toward money. She had expensive tastes and expensive habits that were always pushing him to make more, earn more, take more. I'd seen the credit card bills when I was organizing my father's papers. Marla was drowning in debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to my husband Colton, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. I kept thinking about Marla in the hospital room. I kept thinking about my father, who had been so sick by then, so medicated, barely able to talk or understand his surroundings. And I kept thinking about Justin's face when I asked him when he'd signed those papers. The evasion. The lie. I reached for my phone and called Nora. It was almost midnight, but I needed to know. When she answered, I could hear her take a breath on the other end, like she'd been waiting for this call. "What does it mean that Justin signed the acknowledgement?" I asked. Nora was quiet for a long moment. "It means," she said carefully, choosing her words, "that your brother promised to act in your best interest. But Rachel, I need to ask you something important. Do you trust him?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I'd never trusted Justin. I just never had to admit it out loud before. Not to anyone, not even to myself. Marla started calling me after the funeral. That was new and unexpected. We weren't close. We'd never been close. She was pleasant enough at family events, making polite conversation, but she'd never called me just to chat before. Now she was calling constantly, asking how I was doing, telling me how hard all of this must be on me. Her concern felt performative and fake, like she was reading from a script she'd prepared in advance. "You're so emotional right now," she said during one call. I remember this conversation clearly because it was the first time someone tried to use my feelings as a weapon against me. "Maybe it's good that Justin is handling the money. You're not thinking clearly about anything anymore." I told her I was thinking perfectly clearly. I told her I'd been handling finances for years while managing my father's care. She laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind of laugh that's meant to make you feel small and stupid. Justin came by the next day. He brought papers and a folder. He said we needed to discuss the trust and how it would work going forward. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd confronted him about signing the acknowledgement, and he explained, very carefully, like I was a child who might not understand, how the trust would protect me. "You've been through a lot," he said, speaking to me like I was fragile. "You've made a lot of hard decisions. You've been under enormous stress. The trust protects you from making bad choices right now while you're grieving." I told him I didn't need protection. I told him I needed access to my own money, my own inheritance. He shook his head slowly. "That's not how it works," he said. He pulled out the trust document and pointed to a section I hadn't read carefully. "I can delay distributions. I approve requests. I control everything. It's in the document. I looked at him across the table and felt something die inside me. This wasn't protection. This was control. This was my brother telling me, without actually saying the words, that he owned my future now. That he had power over me. Then, he said something that made my blood run absolutely cold. He mentioned casually, like it wasn't important, that he'd already paid himself a small trustee fee. For managing everything, he said. It's allowed in the trust document. I checked with a lawyer. I asked him how much. He wouldn't tell me. He said it was his business, not mine. That the trust document gave him the right to charge whatever he wanted for his work as trustee. That it was all legal. That night, I got out Dad's copy of the trust document and read it. Really carefully. Every single word. Every clause. Every line. And Justin was right. The document gave him incredible power. He could delay distributions indefinitely. He could approve or deny any requests for money. He could charge expenses to the trust. And there was a line that made me sit up straight and read it 3 times. Family property may be transferred for management purposes at the trustee's discretion. I called Nora again. It was becoming a habit. I read that line to her over the phone. That's vague language, she said immediately. Too vague. But yes, it could allow him to move property around if he wanted to. I asked her if this was normal. She said some of it was normal. But the combination of all these powers given to an unsupervised trustee with no regular accounting requirements was unusual. It was unusual and dangerous. Rachel, she said seriously, I think you need to start paying attention to everything your brother does. Everything. Document it all, everything you see. I said I would. I didn't know then how much I would need that advice. A month after the funeral, I requested money from the trust. It wasn't much. It wasn't unreasonable. I needed to fix the roof on my house. It was starting to leak in 2 places, and I knew if I waited, the water damage would get worse. Water damage is expensive and spreads quickly. I had to be proactive about it. I got a quote from a contractor. I wrote a careful letter to Justin, explaining the situation in detail. I included quotes from the contractor. I included photos of the damage. I explained why it was necessary and why it couldn't wait. I felt like I was begging my own brother for money that was supposed to be mine, but I filled out the form he required and submitted it. He denied it. His response was 2 sentences. Not essential. Roof repair can wait. I called him immediately. I asked him how he could possibly decide whether fixing a leak in my house was essential. He said the trust document gave him that authority. He said he was protecting my assets. He said lots of things that all added up to the same message. I couldn't have my own money. I couldn't have access to what was mine. That night, Justin posted photos on social media. Brand new truck. Shiny and expensive and brand new. The caption read, "Blessed." I looked at the photos for a long time in disbelief. I looked at my brother, smiling in front of a truck that cost more than my roof repair, and something crystallized inside me. He wasn't protecting my assets. He was protecting his access to my money. He was using my inheritance to buy toys. I called Colton into the room and showed him the photos. My husband looked confused and angry. He just denied you roof money, but he's buying himself a new truck? Colton asked. I nodded. This was the moment when my husband started to understand that something was very wrong. This was the moment when he started to see Justin differently. I called Nora immediately. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded angry. That's not a trustee expense, she said. That's personal. Document it. Take screenshots. Save everything. I spent the next 3 hours taking screenshots of every post, every photo, every caption. I saved them all in a folder on my computer labeled evidence. I printed them out. I created a file. This truck became evidence of something, though I didn't know what yet. A week later, I learned about the second truck. Not for Justin. This one was for Marla. Same expensive model, same shiny appearance, same smiling photos, same caption about being blessed. She was beaming in the photos like she'd won something. I did the math in my head quickly. The trustee fees Justin had mentioned, the fees he wouldn't tell me the amount of. They were buying trucks, with my money, with the money that was supposed to be held in trust for my protection, with my father's legacy. I sent Nora all the screenshots. I included the dates of the denials and the dates of the purchases. I wrote everything down in a careful timeline with dates and times. I made it very clear. They're stealing, I said on the phone. I expected Nora to tell me I was overreacting or being emotional. She didn't. It looks that way, she said quietly. But we need to prove it. We need to see the actual accounting. I asked her how we could get that. She said we have to ask for it formally, that Justin would have to provide it. That it would be harder for him to deny us once we made an official request. That the law required it. I didn't know yet how much Justin would fight that request. I didn't know he would hire a lawyer. I didn't know that asking for an accounting of my own trust would be the thing that finally made my family turn against me. I made the formal request through Nora. She sent it certified mail, professional and careful and undeniable. She asked Justin to provide a complete accounting of all trust transactions. She asked for receipts. She asked for documentation of every fee he'd charged. She asked for bank statements. She asked for everything that could be requested. Justin ignored it for 2 weeks. Then he responded through a lawyer, a real lawyer he'd hired and was paying with my money. The response was brutal and shocking. The lawyer's letter said I was harassing the trustee. It said that my repeated requests were interfering with his ability to manage the trust. It suggested that my emotional state was unstable and fragile. It threatened legal action against me if I continued to agitate about the trust's finances. It was a professional threat designed to intimidate. I read that letter 3 times. Harassing. That word kept jumping out at me. I wasn't harassing anyone. I was asking for basic information about my own money. But suddenly, I realized that didn't matter. The story had changed. I wasn't a daughter asking reasonable questions anymore. I was an unstable, emotional woman who couldn't handle her father's death. At Sunday dinner that week, my family confirmed it. My mother, my siblings, my brother-in-law, they all praised Justin. They talked about how responsible he was, how steady and reliable, how good it was that a man was managing the money instead of leaving it with someone who was going through a lot. They made it sound reasonable. I sat at that table and listened to them rewrite reality. They talked about how smart our father was to choose Justin. How lucky I was to have protection during this difficult time. They didn't mention the denied roof repair. They didn't mention the trucks. They didn't mention that I was the one who'd been there, doing the hard work, and now I couldn't even fix my own house. My other brother, Kevin, patted my hand. "Just let Justin handle it," he said. "You're too upset right now. You need to relax." I pulled my hand away. Nobody noticed. Everyone was too busy praising my brother. Colton sat next to me, quiet the whole meal. When we got home, he finally spoke. "That was wrong," he said. "What they're doing to you is wrong." I felt tears on my face. It was the first time someone in my family had acknowledged that anything was wrong. It was the first time someone had defended me. The next morning, Nora called. Her voice was careful and controlled. "The bank flagged an unusual transfer," she said. "It went to an account they weren't expecting. I have someone there who flagged it in our favor." "But Rachel, Justin is moving things. He's moving fast now." I asked her what kind of transfer. She said she needed to see the details, but that we needed to move quickly now. That waiting wasn't an option anymore. I hung up the phone and looked around my house with the leaking roof and felt terrified. I felt like time was running out. I felt like my brother was doing something that I couldn't see yet. Something that would be harder to undo the longer I waited. Something that couldn't be reversed. I called Nora back. I told her I was ready to fight. I didn't know what that meant yet. I just knew I couldn't sit back anymore and let this happen. Judith at the bank was kind. That's what I remember most about that conversation. She was kind and careful and treated me like I was a real person, not an emotional mess who didn't understand money. She explained that Justin had opened a new account. The account was called Trust Operations. He'd moved significant funds from the main trust account into this new account, hundreds of thousands of dollars. On paper, it was legal. He had the authority as trustee. But Judith said something that made the hair on my neck stand up. "It's designed to blur tracking," she said. "The way the account is set up, it's harder to follow where the money goes once it's in there. It's designed to hide the money trail." I asked her if that was normal. She said absolutely not. She said most legitimate trustees keep everything in one clearly documented account. She said the setup Justin had created looked like someone was trying to hide something. It looked like someone was trying to conceal theft. I asked her if she could see what he'd done with the money. She said she couldn't, not officially. But she asked me a question that changed everything. "Are you sure you're the only beneficiary?" she asked. I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. She said that in a trust, there could be primary beneficiaries and contingent beneficiaries. She said that sometimes people find out there are other people named in the trust that they didn't know about. That money could go to other people. That there could be secrets. My hands were shaking when I left the bank. I drove straight to Nora's office. She had me sit down immediately, like she'd been expecting me. Like she'd known I would come. "I need to see the full trust document," I said. "The complete one, with all amendments, everything." Nora pulled out a file. She had already been doing research. She handed me the original document my father had signed, and then she handed me another document, an amendment. Dated during my father's final hospital week. Marla was listed as a contingent beneficiary. Marla, my brother's wife, a woman I barely knew, a woman drowning in debt. She was named as a contingent beneficiary, which meant if something happened to me, if I died, the money would go to her. My inheritance would go to her. I couldn't breathe. I looked at Nora across the desk. "When was this signed?" I asked. "When did Dad sign this?" Nora pointed to the date. It was during the week my father was in the hospital. The week he could barely speak. The week he was so medicated he didn't know what day it was. The week I was there every single day. "He couldn't have signed this," I said. My voice sounded very far away. "He wasn't conscious. He wasn't capable of understanding what he was signing." Nora nodded slowly. "That's what we need to find out." I went through my father's papers with new eyes. Hospital records, medication charts, doctor's notes. During that final week, he was on such high doses of pain medication that the nurses wrote in his chart that he was non-responsive to most stimulus. He couldn't have understood what he was signing. He couldn't have made a decision about who inherited his money. It was impossible. I asked Nora how this could happen. She explained that someone, probably Justin or Marla, had brought the amendment to the hospital. Someone had gotten my father to sign it, even though he was barely conscious. The notary had shown up and notarized it. On paper, everything looked legal and proper, but it wasn't right, not really. What happened in that hospital room was undue influence. It was taking advantage of a dying man. It was theft dressed up in legal language. It was crime. I pulled my sister Tessa aside at work. She'd been there that week sometimes. I asked her if she remembered anyone bringing papers to the hospital. She went pale. She looked around to make sure nobody else was listening. Then she whispered, "Marla brought papers. I saw her with a folder. She was talking to Justin. I didn't think anything of it at the time." I asked her who else was there. She whispered, "Just me and Justin and Marla. Your dad was sleeping." She put the papers on the bed, and then a man came in and witnessed the signature. I felt sick. My father, sleeping. Marla with papers. A man with a notary stamp. My brother. It was so clear now. The plan had been so simple, so straightforward, so obviously wrong. That night, I confronted Justin in person. I showed him the amendment. I asked him what Marla was doing named as a beneficiary on my father's trust. Why was she included? Why would Dad do that? He wouldn't look at me. He tried to leave, but I blocked the doorway. "She's a contingent beneficiary," he said finally. His voice was defensive. "In case something happened to you." Our father could barely speak, I said. How could he possibly want this? How could he consent to this? Justin's face hardened. "Dad wanted to make sure Marla was taken care of. You should understand that. You're the one who was there." I was stunned. He was actually trying to use my caregiving against me. He was trying to make me feel guilty for being present. "I was there because someone had to be," I said. "Not to convince him to change his will. Not to sign away my inheritance to your wife." "That's not what happened," Justin said, but his voice was hollow. He knew what had happened. We both knew. I let him leave. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the floor and cried with an anger so hot it felt like it would burn through my skin. Nora filed a motion the next day. She asked the court to look into the amendment. She asked for the notary records. She asked for the hospital surveillance footage from that week. She was building a case, and I was going to be ready. The trust document fight escalated quickly and completely. Justin hired a second lawyer, then a third. He seemed to have unlimited money for legal fees, which made sense because he was using my trust to pay for them. He was spending my money to fight me for my money. He started making my life difficult in new ways. He delayed my distributions indefinitely. When I asked what was unstable, he actually smirked at me. "You," he said simply. "You're the unstable one. You're the one with problems." I asked him what he meant. He said that I was clearly having a hard time with grief, that I was making accusations without evidence, that I was harassing him and Marla. He said if I didn't stop, he would have to protect the trust by limiting my access to funds entirely. Then he added something that made my blood run cold. "Stop talking to the bank." I stared at him. "You can't tell me who I can talk to." "I can if you're representing yourself as an agent of the trust," he said. He smiled that smile again, the one that didn't reach his eyes. "Keep it up and I'll have to file a report about your mental state." That's when I realized what he was doing. He wasn't just trying to control my money. He was trying to build a case against me. He was trying to make it look like I was unstable, like I was the problem, like everything he was doing was necessary to protect me from myself. I told Colton what happened. My husband listened carefully, and then he told me something that shook me. "He called me," Colton said. "Marla called me, actually. She said she wanted to set up the portal so I could see the trust information. She said it would help you to have someone else checking on things. She said she didn't want you to stress." I felt cold. "Did you do it?" "I signed up," he said. "But Rachel, I didn't understand what I was doing. I realized after that she set it up so she could see everything, so she could monitor what questions you were asking." I looked at my husband and realized something terrifying. They had gotten to him. Not fully, but enough. They'd convinced him that they were trying to help me. They'd made him a participant in the surveillance. That's when I understood the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about the money. This was about isolating me, making me look unstable, turning my family against me, building a case that would allow them to take complete control. I called Nora. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. "We need to move faster," she said when I finished. "They're escalating. That's good, actually. It means we're close to something they're scared of." I asked her what we could do. She told me to document everything, every conversation, every threat, every manipulation. Build a record so clear and so damning that a judge would have no choice but to act. "And Rachel," she said, "I need you to be very, very careful now. Be polite, be calm, give them nothing to use against you." I said I would. I didn't know how hard that would be. I stopped arguing. That was the hardest decision I made, not because it was complicated, but because it went against every instinct I had. Every part of me wanted to scream at Justin, to demand my money, to force him to admit what he'd done. Instead, I documented. I kept a detailed notebook of every conversation, every email, every suspicious transaction. I noted dates and times and exact quotes. I created a spreadsheet tracking the trust transactions. I noted every denied request, every fee Justin charged himself, every suspicious movement of money. I created files and folders and organized everything chronologically. Nora filed a formal accounting request. It was polite, professional, undeniable. The legal system required Justin to respond. He couldn't ignore this one. When his response came, it was through a lawyer again. The letter was brutal. It said that I was harassing the trustee. It said my repeated requests were interfering with his management. It said I was attempting to remove him from his position due to personal disagreements about the distribution of assets. It said, in carefully chosen legal language, that I was a problem that needed to be managed. Then it said something that shocked me. Rachel is currently in a state of emotional distress that makes her capable of making poor decisions. We recommend a psychiatric evaluation before any major distributions. They were building it, the case against me. They were creating a record that showed I was unstable, emotional, unreliable, and they were doing it so carefully, so professionally, that anyone reading it might believe them. It was a calculated strategy. But Nora wasn't fooled. When I read her the letter, she actually laughed. Not a happy laugh, an angry one. "It's desperation," she said. "They know we're close. They're trying to discredit you before we can prove anything." She was right. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the way my family looked at me changing. People started checking on me. They'd call to see how I was doing. They'd ask if I was sleeping okay. They'd suggest I see a therapist. Nobody mentioned the trust. Nobody mentioned the accounting request. They just made sure I knew in 1,000 small ways that they thought I was falling apart. My mother called one day and suggested I go to a mental health facility. "Just for evaluation," she said, "just to help you through this difficult time." I realized, in that moment, exactly what was happening. They were trying to hospitalize me. They were trying to get me committed. Once that happened, once my family had a psychiatrist's evaluation saying I was unstable, everything Justin did would be justified. All the control, all the theft, all the isolation. I told my mother no. I told her I was fine. I told her I didn't need help. Then I hung up the phone and called Nora. "They're going to try to commit me," I said. I could hear the fear in my own voice. "We'll move to court immediately," Nora said. "We have enough. We have the accounting requests. We have the denial of basic funds. We have the suspicious transactions. We have the amendment made while your father was incapacitated. We can file a motion to remove Justin as trustee." I said okay. I was ready. I was terrified, but I was ready. Before Nora could file anything, Marla called me. She was crying. Real tears, or what sounded like real tears. "Rachel, I don't know what you're trying to do," she said, "but you're destroying the family. Can't you see that? Justin is just trying to help you. I'm trying to help you. And you're being so ungrateful." I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. "Your father put Justin in charge because he trusted him," she continued. "Your father knew you'd fall apart without help. He was right about that. Look at you. You're accusing us of theft. You're calling lawyers. You're trying to get Justin removed. Don't you see what you're doing?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I see exactly what I'm doing. I'm protecting myself." "From what?" she cried. "We're your family." "My family stole from me," I said. It was the first time I'd said it out loud. "My brother opened an account called Trust Operations to hide where the money is going. My brother is paying himself fees that don't exist. My brother's wife was added to the trust during a time when my father couldn't consent. That's not help. That's theft." There was silence on the other end. Then Marla hung up. I realized later that call had been recorded, that it was part of the case they were building. But at that moment, I just felt relief. I'd finally said the truth out loud. I'd finally stopped pretending that I was the problem. A week later, someone broke into my car. Just broke in. Nothing was stolen, but they went through everything. My glove compartment, my center console, my trunk. I called the police, and they filed a report, but nothing came of it. I knew who did it. I knew they were looking for my documentation, my notebooks, my evidence. I realized I needed to be smarter. I started keeping copies of everything on a secure cloud server. I printed copies and gave them to Nora. I didn't keep any originals at home. That's when things got really scary. Justin showed up at my house at night. I was alone. Colton was working late. Justin stood on my porch and told me that I needed to stop what I was doing. "You're going to regret this," he said. His face was twisted with anger. "You're going to lose everything. Your marriage, your reputation, everything. And for what? So you can feel superior?" I tried to close the door. He put his hand up to stop me. "You think you're so smart," he said. "You think you can take me down. But I've been managing your money for months now. I've invested it. I've moved it around. Even if you win, even if you get me removed, you're not getting back what you think you're getting back." Then he left. He just turned and walked to his car and drove away. But his words stayed with me. They sat in my chest like poison. The next morning, I called Nora. "He's moved more money," I said. "He told me that last night. He said he's invested it. He said I won't get back what I think I'm getting back." "Then we file immediately," Nora said, "today, before he has time to move anything else." The court motion hit like an earthquake. Nora filed for Justin's removal as trustee and for a full court-supervised accounting. She filed for an investigation into the amendment, adding Marla as a beneficiary. She filed for the appointment of a neutral third party to oversee the trust. Justin's legal team responded with a flurry of motions. They asked for dismissal. They asked for delay. They asked for a psychiatric evaluation of me. They asked for everything they could think of. But the judge wasn't interested in their games. The judge ordered Justin to provide a complete accounting within 30 days. The judge ordered that no more funds could be moved without court approval. The judge ordered that I be given access to all trust documents immediately. This was the first real victory. This was the first time the legal system had acknowledged that something was actually wrong. Nora got the accounting request processed faster than we expected. What we found when we reviewed it was worse than anything I'd imagined. The trustee fees alone were over $200,000. Fees for work that Justin had never done. Fees for a job he wasn't qualified for. Fees that he was charging himself from my inheritance. Then there were the transfers. Marla's consulting deposits, as Nora called them. They looked like payments to Marla from the trust. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of months. Payments labeled as management fees or advisory services, but with no documentation of what services were actually provided. And the LLC. The cabin transfer. My family had owned a cabin on a lake for 3 generations. My great-grandmother had bought it. My grandmother had maintained it. It was supposed to come to me in the trust. Instead, it had been transferred into an LLC called Lakeside Management. And the LLC was listed with 2 managers, Justin and Marla. When we dug deeper, we found that the LLC agreement had a clause. It said that if the cabin stayed in the LLC past a certain date, it could be forced to a sale. And the voting threshold was set up so that I couldn't win any vote alone. I would need either Justin or Marla to vote with me. They hadn't just stolen the inheritance. They'd made it impossible for me to reclaim the property. They'd locked me out completely. I went to court for the preliminary hearing in a daze. I'd known things were bad, but seeing the numbers, seeing the transfers, seeing how carefully it had all been planned, it was overwhelming. The judge asked Justin to explain the fees. Justin's lawyer tried to say it was all standard, that trustees are allowed to charge for their work. The judge looked skeptical. The judge had a look on her face that said she wasn't buying it. Then the judge asked about the cabin transfer. Justin's lawyer said it was for management purposes, just as the trust document allowed. The judge asked what management had cost. Justin's lawyer couldn't answer. After the hearing, Nora pulled me aside. "They're running scared," she said. The LLC was smart thinking, but it's also illegal. Using trust property to fund an illegal arrangement is grounds for removal and damages. I asked her if I would get the cabin back. She said she didn't know, but she said we'd fight for it. She said the court would not tolerate a trustee stealing trust property. The discovery process was brutal and extensive. Both sides were allowed to request documents, emails, bank records, everything. Nora requested everything. She requested thousands of documents. Justin's legal team tried to claim attorney-client privilege on documents that clearly weren't protected. The judge ordered them to produce everything. What we found painted a clear picture of the conspiracy. There were emails between Justin and Marla discussing how to manage the trust. There were messages about hiding the cabin in the LLC. There were jokes about my family thinking I was unstable. There were specific references to my father's medication levels and mental state during the hospital week when he signed the amendment. Most damning of all, there was an email from Marla to Justin that said, "Once the old guy is gone, we can do what we want. Just make sure she looks crazy enough that nobody will believe her." I printed that email out and stared at it for hours. That was the moment I understood that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate plan to steal from me and to destroy my credibility if I found out. I brought the email to Colton. I showed him what his wife's sister-in-law had written about me. I watched his face change as he read it. "That's evil," he said. His voice was very quiet. "That's absolutely evil." "Yes," I said, "it is." He looked at me then and I saw shame in his face. Shame for believing them. Shame for being complicit. Shame for not seeing what was happening. "I'm sorry," he said. "Rachel, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you." I wanted to be angry at him, but I was too tired. Instead, I just let him hold me. The next day, Justin called. He wanted to settle. He offered me a payout. It was significantly less than what my inheritance was worth. It was insultingly small. And the settlement required that I sign a waiver saying I wouldn't talk about what happened. Nora's response was direct. Tell him no. Tell him we're going all the way to trial. But then she said something that made me understand how scared they really were. Rachel, they wouldn't offer to settle if they thought they could win in court. This is desperation. The trial date was set. I had 3 months to prepare, 3 months of discovery, 3 months of reading emails where my brother and his wife discussed stealing from me, 3 months of watching Colton come to terms with the fact that people he trusted had tried to destroy me. My mother called during the 2nd month. She was crying. I've been reading some of the documents in the case, she said. Rachel, I didn't know. I didn't understand what was happening. I know, I said. I wasn't angry at her anymore. She'd been manipulated too. I'm so sorry, she said. I believed them when they told me you were unstable. I should have known better. You were always the strong one. You were always the one who could handle things. Mom, I said, I need you to tell me the truth. Do you remember Marla bringing papers to the hospital that week? There was a long silence. Yes, my mother finally said. I do. I thought it was routine paperwork. She said your father wanted to make sure everything was in order. And he was so sedated. I didn't think he understood what he was signing. I asked her if she would testify to that. She said she would. That's when I realized the case wasn't just about proving Justin and Marla were guilty. It was also about healing my family. It was about making them see what they'd done by choosing to believe lies instead of truth. I spent the month before trial with Nora, preparing my testimony. She made me relive everything, every denial, every threat, every moment of manipulation. It was exhausting and painful, but it was necessary. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Colton and thought about my father. I thought about how he'd trusted Justin with my future. I thought about how that trust had been so completely betrayed. Colton was asleep next to me, but even in sleep, he looked troubled. Our marriage had survived, but barely. The damage that Justin and Marla had done extended far beyond just money. They damaged trust itself. The next morning, I put on a blue suit and went to court. Nora looked confident, but I knew she was nervous too. We'd built a solid case, but nothing was guaranteed. The courtroom was full. My family was there. Justin and Marla sat on one side with their lawyers. Colton sat behind me with my mother and Kevin. The judge came in, and everything went quiet. The trial lasted 5 days. It felt like 5 years. Justin took the stand on the 2nd day. He tried to present himself as a dutiful trustee who was protecting me from my own instability. He said the fees were reasonable. He said the cabin transfer was for estate planning purposes. He said everything he'd done was within his rights as trustee. Nora's cross-examination was surgical. She took him through every single transaction. She made him explain the trust operations account. She made him explain why a truck was necessary for trustee duties. She made him explain the consulting payments to his wife. He got angry. He started raising his voice. He accused me of lying. He said I was trying to destroy him out of jealousy. Nora let him keep talking, and with every word, he looked worse. The judge watched this with an expression that told me exactly what she was thinking. This man was not a dutiful trustee. This man was a thief who was angry about being caught. Marla took the stand next. She tried to present herself as a concerned family member who was just trying to help. It didn't work. The emails were too clear. The consulting payments were too obvious. The amendment her husband had orchestrated was too damning. When it was my turn to testify, I was terrified. But I'd prepared. I told the truth. I talked about the years I'd spent caring for my father. I talked about being denied basic funds. I talked about the threats. I talked about the clear pattern of theft and manipulation. Nora had me identify documents, the truck photos, the trust documents, the emails, the accounting records. The amendment signed during my father's incapacity. Justin's lawyer tried to discredit me. He suggested I was bitter. He suggested I was jealous of my brother's success. He suggested I had a mental health condition that made me unreliable. I stayed calm. I answered every question directly. I didn't get angry or defensive. I just told the truth. On the 5th day, we heard the closing arguments. The judge took the case under advisement and said she would issue a ruling within 2 weeks. I left the courtroom feeling hollowed out. Colton held my hand as we walked to the car. My mother hugged me. Kevin told me he was proud of me. "Whatever happens," my mother said, "you did the right thing." I hoped she was right. I'd spent months in court. I'd spent tens of thousands of dollars on legal fees. I'd damaged relationships that might never heal, and I still didn't know if I would actually get my money back. The judge's ruling came on a Friday. Nora called me at home. "You won," she said. Her voice was full of emotion. "Rachel, you won." I made her read it to me, the whole thing. Every word. The judge found that Justin had violated his fiduciary duty. The judge found that the amendment adding Marla as a beneficiary had been signed under circumstances that constituted undue influence. The judge found that the trustee fees were excessive and improper. The judge found that the cabin transfer was an unauthorized use of trust property. The ruling ordered that Justin be removed as trustee immediately. It ordered that a neutral third-party trustee be appointed to manage the trust going forward. It ordered that Justin repay all improper fees plus interest. It ordered that the LLC transfer of the cabin be unwound and the property returned to the trust. It ordered that Marla be removed as a beneficiary due to conflict of interest. I read those words over and over. Each one was a validation. Each one was proof that I had been right, that they had been wrong, that the truth mattered. But there was a line that made me cry. The judge wrote, "The trustee's actions demonstrate a clear pattern of self-dealing and misappropriation of trust assets. The beneficiary's concerns were reasonable and justified. The court finds that the beneficiary acted in good faith throughout this dispute." The judge had vindicated me, not just legally, but morally. She had looked at everything and said, "You were right." I called Colton and read the ruling to him. He cried. He said he was sorry. He said he should have believed me from the beginning. "I know," I said. But I didn't say it cruelly. I said it because it was true, but also because we could move past this now. That night, I called everyone in my family individually and read them the ruling. My mother cried. Kevin apologized. My other siblings admitted they'd been wrong. Even Tessa, who had been scared of Marla, called to say she was proud of me. Nobody heard from Justin or Marla. They just disappeared. Marla's consulting business collapsed. Justin lost his job at the firm where he worked. Their marriage imploded publicly. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I mostly felt sad. Sad that my brother had betrayed me. Sad that my family had been so easily manipulated. Sad about what had been lost. But I also felt relief. The fight was over. The truth had won. And I had survived. The legal process wasn't actually finished. There was still the matter of damages. There was still the unwinding of all the transfers. There was still the appointment of a new trustee and the accounting of what was left. What we discovered was both better and worse than we'd expected. The trustee fees that Justin had charged himself came to almost $300,000. The payments to Marla for consulting came to another $250,000. The truck purchases, the property transfers, the hidden investments, all of it added up. But Justin had also been reckless. He'd used trust funds to pay for things that clearly weren't related to the trust. He'd invested the money in risky ventures that lost value. In his desperation to hide what he was doing, he'd actually lost a significant portion of the inheritance. The new trustee, a court-appointed professional named Martin, worked with Nora to figure out what had actually happened. The damage was extensive, but not irreparable. Much of the money could be recovered. The cabin could definitely be returned to the trust. And Justin would be forced to repay what he'd stolen, or as much of it as he still had access to. But I would never get back all of my inheritance. I would never get back what my brother had taken. That was the hardest part to accept. Nora sat with me in her office as we reviewed the final accounting. "You did everything right," she said. "You protected yourself. You documented everything. You went to court. You won. That took extraordinary courage." "I still lost money," I said. The number on the page felt too large, too final. "Yes," Nora said. "But you would have lost everything if you hadn't fought. Your brother would have continued stealing. He would have found ways to isolate you further. He would have made sure you never saw a penny of what was supposed to be yours." She was right. I knew she was right. But it was hard to feel victorious when there was still so much loss. Martin scheduled a meeting with me to explain the new trust structure. He was a calm, professional man who treated me with respect. He explained that going forward, the trust would be managed transparently. All transactions would be documented. All fees would be reasonable and clearly explained. I would have access to an accounting whenever I wanted. This is what should have happened from the beginning, he said. And he was right. This was normal. This was reasonable. This was what a trustee who actually cared about the beneficiary would have done. I asked Martin about the cabin. He said the legal process would take a few more months, but the cabin would definitely return to the trust. And once it would be mine to use and eventually to pass on to my own children. Your father set this up to protect you, Martin said. And it did. The trust protected you by forcing your brother's criminal behavior into the open. I hadn't thought of it that way, but he was right. The trust that was supposed to protect me had done its job, just not in the way my father had intended. 3 months later, I stood in front of the lake cabin for the first time since my father's death. It was exactly how I remembered it. The same weathered wood, the same dock, the same view of the water that had been the backdrop for my entire childhood. The transfer documents had been signed. The LLC had been dissolved. The cabin was back in the trust, and the trust was now genuinely for my benefit. I walked through the house and found my father's handwriting on the kitchen wall. A date from when he'd taken me here as a child. A note saying, Rachel's first time at the lake. She caught a fish. I put my hand against the wall where his hand had written those words and I cried. Not from sadness anymore. From relief. From the knowledge that I had fought so hard and actually won something back. Colton found me there. He wrapped his arms around me from behind. It's beautiful, he said. It was supposed to be mine all along, I said. It is now, he said. You made sure of that. That night I called Nora. I wanted to thank her. She'd spent months fighting for me. She'd taken on a powerful opponent. She'd never wavered or given up. You did this, she said when I thanked her. You had the courage to question what was happening. You had the strength to keep going when everyone was telling you that you were crazy. You won because you refused to accept the theft. Before we hung up, she said something I'll never forget. Rachel, if anyone in your family ever comes to you and asks you to keep quiet for peace, remember this. Remember what the truth cost you, and remember that peace without justice isn't peace. It's acceptance of theft. I said I would remember. I told her that I would tell this story, that I would make sure other people knew what could happen if they didn't pay attention to their trusts, if they didn't ask questions, if they accepted the lies of people they trusted. Marla disappeared from the state. Justin eventually got a job out of state, far from here. The damage they'd done slowly started to heal, but it never completely went away. Colton and I stayed together, but the trust between us had to be rebuilt. My relationship with my family started to heal, but more carefully now. We all understood what people were capable of when money was involved. The cabin became my sanctuary. Over the next year, I spent every weekend there that I could. I repaired it, I restored it, I cleaned out my father's things and found letters he'd written but never sent. One of them was addressed to me. The envelope was sealed. The letter inside was dated just a bang, week before he died. He'd written it during a moment of clarity when the medication was at just the right level that he could think. If anything feels wrong, he'd written, call Nora. Justin is not to control your share alone. I wanted someone to manage the details, but not someone who would hurt you. Promise me you'll question things if they don't make sense. I sat on the dock with that letter and realized that my father had been warning me. He'd suspected that Justin might do something wrong. He'd tried to protect me by putting that letter away for me to find. I never would have found it if I hadn't fought. Never would have read those words. Never would have known that he'd been concerned enough to write it. I had prints made of the letter and gave one to Nora. She framed it in her office. She said it was a reminder of why the work she did mattered. Over the course of the next year, the legal system continued to process the consequences of what Justin and Marla had done. Justin had to pay back the trustee fees. He had to pay restitution for the misappropriated funds. The total came to over $400,000. He fought it. He appealed. He tried to argue that he'd acted in good faith. The courts rejected every argument. The law was clear. A trustee who steals from the trust is a thief. Marla faced her own consequences. The debt that had driven all of this, the lifestyle she'd been trying to maintain with stolen money, caught up with her. Her creditors came after her. She filed for bankruptcy. I didn't enjoy watching them suffer. I would have preferred that none of this had ever happened. But I also couldn't feel sorry for them. They'd deliberately stolen from me. They deliberately tried to destroy my credibility. They deliberately set out to take control of my life. They had to live with the consequences of their choices. A year after the court ruling, a journalist contacted me. She'd read about the case and wanted to tell the story. I was reluctant at first. I'd been through so much, and I didn't want to relive it all again. But then I thought about what Nora had said. Peace isn't surrender. And I realized that the only way to make sure this happened to fewer people was to tell this story. To show people what to look for. To help people understand that family and love don't prevent theft. That the people closest to you can be the ones who hurt you most. I sat down with the journalist for a series of interviews. I told her everything. About my father's death, about the trust, about the slow, careful way that Justin and Marla had stolen from me, about the manipulation and the lies. I told her about how my family had believed the lie that I was unstable, about how they'd been willing to accept my brother's theft if it meant they didn't have to acknowledge that something was wrong. The articles ran in a local publication first, then were picked up by national media. Suddenly, people everywhere wanted to tell me their own stories. Other people who'd been harmed by trustees. Other people who'd been gaslit by family members. Other people who'd been accused of being crazy for questioning the obvious. I realized that this wasn't unique, that what happened to me happens to thousands of people every year. That the legal system tries to prevent it, but people like Justin and Marla find ways around the rules. I started a nonprofit. I called it Trust Survivors. It provides free legal counseling to people who suspect their trusts are being mismanaged. It provides support groups. It helps people gather documentation and file complaints with the authorities. 3 years after the court ruling, we'd helped 200 people. Some of them recovered their money. Some of them didn't. But all of them got answers. All of them found out the truth about what was happening to their inheritances. And I realized that the reason I'd fought so hard, the reason I'd been willing to sacrifice so much, wasn't just about my inheritance. It was about justice. It was about standing up to people who thought they could take advantage of the system. It was about making sure that family didn't give you permission to be a thief. 5 years after my father's death, I returned to the cabin for the anniversary. Colton came with me. So did my mother and Kevin. It was the first time we'd all been back together since everything had fallen apart. We stood on the dock together and watched the sunset. The sky turned colors I don't have names for. Orange and purple and gold and pink all mixed together. He loved this place, my mother said. She was talking about my father. He did, I agreed. And he wanted me to have it. You fought for it, Kevin said. You wouldn't let them take it. I nodded. That was true. I had fought, and fighting had cost me something, but it had also given me something. It had given me back my life. It had given me back my future. That night we sat inside the cabin, and I told them the full story. Not just the facts, but how it had felt. How scared I'd been. How isolated. How much I doubted myself when everyone was telling me I was crazy. My mother cried. Kevin put his arm around her. We should have believed you, Kevin said. We should have questioned things instead of just accepting what they told us. You do now, I said. And it was true. My family had come around, they'd seen the evidence, they'd acknowledged the truth, and now we could rebuild. It wasn't the same as before. The trust was broken, and you can fix broken trust, but you can never fully go back to the way it was before you broke it. But we could move forward. We could be more careful. We could be more honest. I told them about the work I was doing with Trust Survivors. I told them about the people I was helping. I told them that what happened to me didn't have to happen to anyone else if people would just pay attention. If people would just ask questions. If people would just refuse to accept the lies. You should write a book, my mother said. You should tell this story to everyone. I said, maybe I would. I said maybe there was value in documenting exactly how the theft happened, in showing how carefully it was planned, in proving that it could be stopped if people knew what to look for. That night, sleeping in my childhood bedroom at the cabin, I felt peace, not the peace of not fighting, but the peace of having fought and won. The peace of knowing that I'd told the truth even when the truth was hard. The book I wrote was called Stolen Trust: How My Family Stole My Inheritance and How I Got It Back. It became a bestseller. Not a huge bestseller, but big enough that I started getting letters from all over the country. People thanking me, people asking for advice, people wanting to know if their own situations were similar to mine. I started speaking at conferences about financial elder abuse and trust mismanagement. I taught workshops to families about how to set up trusts safely. I helped develop legislation in our state that increased protections for trust beneficiaries. And slowly, I started to heal. Not completely. I don't think you ever fully heal from betrayal by family. But I learned to live with it. I learned to see my brother's theft as his failure, not my failure. 10 years after the court ruling, Justin reached out to me. He was living 3 states away. He was married to someone else. Marla had left him years before, unable to handle the bankruptcy and the public shame. He had a job managing a warehouse. He was, in many ways, living a normal life. His email said, "Rachel, I know I've done things that hurt you. I know I stole from you. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now, looking back, what I did was wrong. I was selfish and greedy, and I let Marla manipulate me. I spent years telling myself that I was justified, that I was protecting you, but I was just lying to myself. I'm sorry." I read that email to Colton. I read it to Nora. I read it to myself, over and over. In the end, I didn't respond. Not because I hated Justin, but because there was nothing to say that would matter. He could apologize, but that didn't undo what he'd done. It didn't give me back the years I'd spent fighting for what was already mine. It didn't give me back the trust I'd lost. But I also didn't hate him anymore. Hate required too much energy. I'd spent enough years angry. I was done with that. Instead, I just moved forward. I kept doing the work with trust survivors. I kept helping people. I kept telling this story so that others would know that this could happen and how to prevent it. 15 years after my father's death, my mother passed away. She was old and she was tired, and when she went, it was peaceful. She went in her sleep at the cabin, in a room with a view of the lake. In her will, she left the cabin equally to me and Kevin. No trust involved, just a simple will. Kevin sold his share to me, and I became the full owner. I renovated it. I added solar panels and made it energy efficient. I created spaces where trust survivors could hold retreats. I also created a scholarship in my father's name. It was for people studying law or social work or financial counseling. It was for people who wanted to help prevent the kind of theft that had happened to me. Nora retired and moved to the cabin area. She became the director of the Trust Survivors nonprofit. We worked together for another decade, helping hundreds of people understand and protect their inheritances. She said to me one day, "You know what your father would think if he could see what you've built out of his pain?" "What?" I asked. "He'd be proud," she said. "He'd know that his life meant something, that his death led to something good." I thought about that a lot. I thought about how my father had tried to set up a trust that would protect me, how that trust had been corrupted by my brother, how I'd had to fight to reclaim it, and how in fighting, I'd found a way to help thousands of other people. Maybe that was the real inheritance. Not the money, not the cabin, but the strength to stand up for what was right, that even when everyone was telling me I was wrong. 20 years after the court ruling, Trust Survivors had become the largest nonprofit in the country dedicated to preventing trustee abuse. We had lawyers, social workers, financial advisors, and advocates, all working to help people protect their inheritances. We'd helped recover over $500 million in misappropriated funds. We'd gotten laws passed in every state that increased protections for beneficiaries. We'd trained thousands of lawyers and financial advisors in how to spot the warning signs of trustee misconduct. And we'd changed the culture. When people heard the word trustee, they no longer automatically thought of someone trustworthy. They thought of someone who needed oversight, someone who needed to be monitored, someone who could potentially abuse their power if not carefully watched. I was 67 years old now. My hair was gray. My face had the lines that come from years of fighting and then years of rebuilding. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I was proud of. Someone who'd been knocked down but had gotten back up. Someone who'd told the truth even when it cost everything. I gave a speech at a major financial conference. 2,000 people in a hotel ballroom. People from the financial industry, from the legal field, from nonprofits, from government agencies. They were there to talk about elder abuse and financial fraud. I told them my story. I started with the will reading and ended with trust survivors. I talked about the warning signs that people should watch for. I talked about the importance of documentation. I talked about the courage it takes to accuse family members of theft. And at the end I said this. They called it protection. It was control. They called it management. It was theft. They called me crazy for questioning them. I was the most sane I'd ever been. If your family ever asks you to stay quiet for peace, remember my story. Peace isn't surrender. Justice is what matters. Truth is what matters, and you deserve both. The room stood up and applauded. I looked out at the faces and saw people who got it. People who'd spent their careers trying to prevent what had happened to me. The cabin is my favorite place now. Colton and I spend most of our time there. We've converted the barn into a retreat center where Trust Survivors hosts workshops and support groups. I walk the same dock where my father walked. I see my father's handwriting in the walls. I feel his presence in this place that he loved, this place that was supposed to be mine all along. Sometimes I think about the person I was before all of this. Before Justin and Marla. Before the betrayal and the lies and the fight for the truth. I think about how naive I was. How much I trusted that family meant something. How much I believed that love prevented theft. I don't believe that anymore. But I'm not bitter, I'm not angry, I'm just aware. Aware that people can surprise you in terrible ways. Aware that money brings out the worst in people. Aware that being family doesn't mean being trustworthy. And I'm grateful. Grateful that I fought. Grateful that I found people like Nora who believed me. Grateful that the legal system, for all its flaws, eventually saw the truth. Grateful that I can now use my experience to help others. Colton and I have a garden now. We grow vegetables and herbs, we make jam from the berries. It's simple and peaceful, and it's everything I needed after years of fighting. Sometimes young people ask me if I regret the years I spent in court instead of just moving on. If I wish I'd accepted the settlement and forgotten about it. The answer is always no. Because what I won wasn't just money. What I won was the right to be believed, the right to be taken seriously, the right to say that I was wronged and have the system agree with me. That's worth fighting for. That's worth everything. 25 years after my father's death, they made a documentary about my case. It premiered at a major film festival and then aired on a streaming platform. Suddenly, millions of people knew my story. The documentary was called Trust and Betrayal. The Rachel story. It told the full story from beginning to end. It included interviews with me, with Nora, with Colton, with my family. It included courtroom footage and documentary evidence. But most importantly, it included interviews with people I'd helped. People who'd been in similar situations. People who'd been gaslit and manipulated and accused of being crazy for questioning their trustees. One woman, named Patricia, had been prevented from accessing her inheritance for 8 years. Her brother had become trustee after her father's death, and he'd systematically denied her access to funds while secretly transferring money to himself. She watched the documentary and recognized her own story and mine. She called Trust Survivors and told us what was happening. We connected her with a lawyer. She went to court. She won. Her court battle took 2 years instead of the 5 years mine took because now there was precedent. Now there were laws in place that made it harder for trustees to abuse their power. Because I had fought, Patricia's fight was easier. That's what drives me now. The knowledge that my suffering wasn't just about me, it was about paving a way for others. The documentary brought a lot of attention to Trust Survivors. We got funding we'd never had before. We opened offices in 20 more states. We started a free legal helpline that takes thousands of calls per month. I hired lawyers specifically trained in trust law. I hired social workers to help people process the trauma of family betrayal. I created a database where people could report suspicious trustee activity knowing it would be taken seriously. And I kept fighting. Not in my own case anymore, but for thousands of other people's cases. Nora retired fully after the documentary came out. She was 80 years old and had earned a rest. Before she retired, we created the Nora Award, given annually to attorneys who fight fiercely for trust beneficiaries. She cried when we told her about the award. "This was never about me," she said. "Yes, it was," I told her. "You're the reason I won. You're the reason I had the courage to keep going." By 30 years after my father's death, Trust Survivors had become the largest nonprofit in the country dedicated to preventing trustee abuse. We had lawyers, social workers, financial advisors, and advocates, all working to help people protect their inheritances. We'd helped recover over $500 million in misappropriated funds. We'd gotten laws passed in every state that increased protections for beneficiaries. We'd trained thousands of lawyers and financial advisors in how to spot the warning signs of trustee misconduct. I was 82 years old now. I'd accomplished more in these 30 years than I ever thought possible. And yet, every day, I still got emails and calls from people in crisis. People whose trustees were stealing from them. People whose families didn't believe them. People who felt alone. I spent my last working years mentoring the next generation of Trust Survivors advocates. I worked with young lawyers who wanted to fight for beneficiaries. I worked with social workers who wanted to help people heal from the trauma of family betrayal. I told them what I'd learned over 3 decades of fighting. The first thing to understand, I told them, is that trustee abuse looks different from the outside than it does from the inside. From the outside, it looks like a family dispute. From the inside, it feels like betrayal. The second thing is that the victim is almost never believed at first. Everyone assumes they're exaggerating or emotional or have an ulterior motive. You have to believe the victims even when no one else does. And the third thing is that documentation is everything. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. If you don't have proof, you can't win. I saw these young advocates taking notes. I saw them taking this seriously, and I knew that the fight would go on without me, that the system would keep getting better, that fewer people would suffer the way I had. The last case I personally helped with came from a woman named Elena, who reached out to me directly. She was 43 years old, and her mother had just died. Her older brother had been named trustee, and he was already showing signs of abuse. He was denying her access to information. He was charging fees that didn't match any work he'd actually done. He was moving assets around in ways that didn't make sense. And her family was already starting to turn against her. They were saying she was being selfish, that her brother was doing his best, that she should be grateful instead of suspicious. I met with Elena in person at the cabin. Colton made lunch while we sat on the dock and talked. "Is it going to get better?" she asked me. "Is my family ever going to come around?" I was honest. I told her that some of them might. Some of them might look at the evidence and see the truth, but some of them might always choose to believe her brother. That was something she would have to accept. "What I can tell you," I said, "is that the truth matters. Even if no one else believes you, you'll know the truth, and that's worth fighting for." Elena went to court. The process took 2 years instead of 5, because now there were better laws in place. Because the system understood trustee abuse better. Because people like me had fought to make it harder for people like her brother. She won. The court removed her brother as trustee and ordered him to repay the misappropriated funds. Some of her family came around, some of them didn't. But Elena knew the truth, and that mattered to her. She called me after the court ruling. She was crying, but they were good tears. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for everything you did. Thank you for making sure I could win." After I hung up, I looked at Colton and realized I was ready. Ready to retire, ready to hand over the work to the next generation, ready to just be, without always fighting. I officially retired from Trust Survivors on a clear day in spring. The board threw me a party at the cabin. There were people from all over the country, lawyers who'd worked with me, beneficiaries I'd helped, family members who'd come to understand the damage that trustee abuse causes. Nora was there in her 90s now, but still sharp as ever. She gave a speech about my courage. She talked about how I'd changed the world. I gave a speech too. I thanked everyone who'd helped me over the years. I talked about the thousands of people we'd helped. I talked about the laws we'd changed, but mostly I talked about gratitude. Gratitude for the people who believed in me. Gratitude for the system that, despite its flaws, eventually saw the truth. Gratitude for the life I'd built after the destruction. I spent years fighting, I said, looking out at the faces. Years fighting for the right to be believed. Years fighting for my money. Years fighting for justice. And every single day, I knew it was worth it. Because every person we helped, every person who got their inheritance back, every person who got their family to see the truth, that mattered. But mostly, I'm grateful for the chance to have fought it all, for the privilege of being strong enough to keep going, for being born into a time and place where women can go to court and demand justice and win. Some people aren't that lucky. Some people never get their day in court. Some people never get to tell their story. If you're reading this, if you have that opportunity, take it. Fight for yourself. Demand the truth. Because you deserve both. After the party, I walked the dock alone. The sun was setting. The lake was calm, and I felt at peace in a way I never had before. I'd been given an impossible task. I'd been told I was crazy. I'd been told to shut up for the sake of family peace. I'd been told that some things were too big to fight, but I'd fought anyway, and I'd won. I'm 92 now. Colton passed away 5 years ago, and I miss him every day. But I'm grateful for the life we had, for how we made it through the betrayal and came out stronger. I live at the cabin now, full-time. I have help, a housekeeper, a caregiver who comes 3 times a week. I spend my days reading, gardening, and answering emails from people who want to tell me their stories. I write a lot. A blog about trustee abuse. Letters to people going through similar situations. Memoirs of my experience that I'm not sure I'll ever publish. I think about my father often. I think about what he intended when he set up the trust. I think about how he never could have imagined that his son would betray his daughter with such deliberate cruelty. But I also think about what grew out of that betrayal. About the organization I created. About the thousands of people I helped. About the laws that were changed. I think about how my father's attempt to protect me through a trust ultimately did protect me. Just not in the way he imagined. The trust forced my brother to be explicit about his theft. It created a paper trail. It made it impossible for him to hide what he was doing. I look at the note he left for me, still in its frame above my desk. If anything feels wrong, call Nora. Justin is not to control your share alone. He knew, not exactly what would happen, but he knew his youngest son wasn't trustworthy, and he left me instructions on what to do if he was right. I followed his instructions. I called Nora. And I won. If you're reading this story, if you're going through something similar, I want you to know something important. You are not crazy. If your gut tells you that something is wrong with your trust, believe your gut. Document everything. Get a lawyer. Ask questions. Don't accept vague answers or dismissals. And when everyone is telling you that you're overreacting or being selfish or being too emotional, remember that I was told those things too. And I was right. They called what happened to me protection. It was control. They called my brother's theft management. It was theft. They called my questions harassment. They were reasonable requests for basic information. They called my refusal to accept their lies instability. It was the most stable I'd ever been. I won because I refused to accept the narrative they were building about me. I won because I documented everything. I won because I found people who believed me. I won because I wouldn't give up. The cabin is still here, still standing. It's over 100 years old now, and it's seen 3 generations of my family. It was supposed to be mine all along. And it is. The Trust Survivors organization continues to grow. New leaders have taken over. New lawyers are fighting new battles. New beneficiaries are winning back what was taken from them. The work continues. The fight continues. And people like me, people who refuse to be gaslit, who refuse to accept theft in the name of family, who refuse to stay silent for peace, we win. That's what I want you to remember. When they tell you to stay quiet, when they tell you that you're the problem, when they tell you that accepting theft is better than fighting for the truth, Remember that peace without justice isn't peace. It's surrender. And you deserve better than surrender. You deserve the truth. You deserve justice. You deserve your inheritance. Fight for it, just like I did. Because in the end, the truth wins. Always.